This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Squash Canada's Coach Professional Development webinar series. Today's topic is mental strength in relation to your guide to success in sports and life. We hope you find it very exciting. Our presenter today is Patrick Hartunian, who many of you know is a squash coach, personal trainer, and an award-winning author on this topic. And so I am going to turn it over to Patrick for his presentation on mental strength, your guide to success in sports and life. Take it away, Patrick.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in on this webinar. It's an exciting topic for myself, definitely. So I just want to go over just a brief version of what this is going to be like. This will not be a very technical webinar, so you don't have to worry about what your educational background is, whether you have sports psychology background or background in sports sciences. So this webinar information will basically tailor to anybody, so it'll be a lot easier to understand. So Jeffrey, if you can go to the next slide. So just a little contact information for myself. So I got my email, Instagram, Facebook page, my website. So again, I've been a personal trainer and squash professional for many years. Right, so I'm a mental strength coach and as well as a coach evaluator for squash coaches. And I'm certified through the National Coaching Certification Program and the Canadian Personal Trainers Network, both for over 25 years, and the best-selling author of the book that Jeffrey was mentioning, which is Mental Strength, Your Guide to Success in Sports. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide, where we begin. All right, so I'm gonna read you a little something that I wrote a while back, and this writing was actually inspired by some of my past students who had great attitudes and a great philosophy of just enjoying themselves with sport. So here we go. So love of sport. If athletes live with fear, they learn to be apprehensive. Apprehension can end an athlete's success. But if athletes live with praise, they learn to appreciate. If athletes live with approval, they learn to believe. If athletes live with fairness, they learn what kindness is. If athletes live with honesty, they learn what truth is. If athletes live with encouragement, they learn to be confident. If athletes live with tolerance, they learn to be patient. If athletes live with acceptance, they learn to love. So I really like, well, this writing, nothing to do with myself writing it, but just what it represents. It represents the whole morality and ethical aspect of just being a good person, being a good athlete. So there's not much in terms of worrying about the winning and losing or result, but there's a lot more on the mental side. So basically, it's facing your fears, not getting stuck in that mode where you're just constantly being apprehensive because of your past fears. So it's just moving on. It's just like the saying, if you fall, you get back up. Those that stay down are going to struggle through the process, and it takes a lot longer to build that confidence, to believe in themselves, and so forth. Okay, so Jeffrey, next slide. So here's where we begin. So what is mental strength? So this is where I would, as opposed to waiting till the end of the webinar to get for some questions and answers, I would like some input from anybody who would like to, give a few just one word points, like a brainstorm of what mental strength would be for you. So if anyone wants to unmute and just share some ideas, now would be the time.
Hi, I'm Sebastian, and I would say that for me, it's the ability to be in the present moment.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else? Nobody? Okay, well, we'll fill in some of the blanks for you in the next slide. So Jeffrey, next slide. Okay, so there's many examples of what mental strength would be. You got focus, commitment, patience, desire, passion, can separate from emotions, and that'll be the part of what Sebastian was talking about, being in the present moment, right? So if you're in present moment, you can't really reflect on emotions that come to be from something that just happened, which would be a mistake, which would be in the past. So inner peace, creating goals to succeed, having a purpose, believing in the process, and believing in yourself. So these are just some of the many aspects of mental strength. So there's many more, and it's just a matter of constantly brainstorming and constantly living and experiencing life, and then you can just keep adding points to this. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the actual definition of mental strength would be, mental strength means having inner peace, as Sebastian mentioned, and detaching yourself emotionally from concrete consequences and outcomes, and focus on the process of achieving your goals. So you can see so many of the points that I was talking about before, which are points that I just put down. A lot of them are directly in the definition of mental strength. Besides, mental strength requires you to have the ability to overcome discomfort, especially when facing adversity. So you can see a lot of this is also in the love of sport that we went over at the beginning. So it's all kind of blends together. So next slide. Here we have mental toughness, which will be a part of mental strength. So what is the definition of mental toughness? A quality of mind or intellect characterized by, among other things, a refusal to be intimidated, a determination to finish a contest even when things are going badly, and an ability to control emotions and remain highly focused when under the pressure of intense competition. So you can see, so mental toughness is really where our top athletes in any sport need to really focus on, right? So this whole aspect of controlling the emotions, things aren't going your way, but you got to stick to it. You got to stick to it, and you got to keep pushing yourself, and you got to finish the competition, regardless whether you win the competition in terms of the gold medal. But just the fact of actually finishing it, refusing to be intimidated, not allowing, let's say if it's a sport like squash, for example, then you have referee decisions, you have many different aspects that could interfere with your focus on the court. So your ability to stay tough enough to understand that those things are going to happen. Those things are going to be barriers to try and stop you from finishing. So it's all about being, mentally tough as well as mentally strong. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's Kobe Bryant, who unfortunately recently passed away. But but what he pretty much represented, what he lived for, and what he was known for, is right here. The most important thing is to try and inspire people so that they can be great in whatever they want to do. So I really like this because it highlights letting people have choice, right? So people should have a choice of what they want to do, And if that's something that they have passion for, then we should be inspiring them to be great at whatever they want to do. Next slide. All right, so where and how to begin? First, we have to know and understand our why. So I want to ask all of you, what is your why? So here we might have some of you are coaches, some of you might be parents, some of you might be taking this webinar more as a coach to see how you can help your athlete. But for me, I'm here as a coach for all of you, not just the athletes. So every single person. So everyone has to have a why. So if your athletes have goals and you work with them on their goal setting, you as a coach should also have a goal of whatever it is you want to achieve as a coach for yourself, not just for your athletes. If you're a parent, same thing. So, so if anyone wants to unmute and just share whatever your why would be, whether it's why you're involved in coaching, whether it's why you're here today for this webinar. Anybody?
Jeff here. Just to why is to grow the sport and to make people enjoy the sport as much as I do.
Okay, excellent. And Jeff, where are you based?
The Edmonton Squash Club.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else?
I would say that I personally struggled a long time in my personal career as a squash player with mental toughness, and I've gotten better at it now, but I'd like to be able to coach mental toughness in my work as a coach. So I'm based out of Moncton, actually, Squash Moncton.
Okay, excellent. Yep, there's someone else just coming on. Okay, while others think of contributing, Sebastian, it's a really good idea you have. You want to try and now help others with the mental strength. You recognize that you had a little tough go at the mental toughness as an athlete yourself, but you want as a coach to be able to introduce it, which is excellent, because that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Is coaches, as we know, the first thing coaches are going to do is introduce the technical aspect, and then you have maybe the tactical aspect of how to introduce certain shots into a game situation. So you have all these things, all these different areas that are more focused on, and the area that doesn't get as much focused on is the mental strength. So very good on you, Sebastian, to want to introduce it to your athletes. Awesome. Anybody else want to share their why?
Patrick, we had a comment from apologies, I think it's Kjeld Gattinger. Okay. He says, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And I believe that's from Friedrich Nietzsche, if I understand correctly.
Yes, excellent, which is exactly
right. Exactly right. And sorry, I along the same lines of the last fellow, I found actually the mental part of the game came easier to me. Like not necessarily the physical bit, but the X's and O's and the staying focused. So I too would like to understand. I don't really appreciate necessarily how sort of I got a natural allotment of it and how to extend that to the students to make sure that they give themselves the best possible chance.
Excellent. Awesome. Yeah, and all of us are individuals, and all of us come through a different path. Some of us, we're just able to focus easier, like on the mental side. We didn't worry as much about certain things, and others had a tougher go. So every individual is different. We will learn towards later in the webinar that it all starts from the beginning, and that beginning is from when we're born. So let's go to the next stage or next slide. Okay, so here's something just put together by Dr. Greg Wells. He's a friend of mine. He's a scientist and author and so on. So this is a little 1% tip from his book, The Ripple Effect. So know your why. Knowing your why is absolutely critical to ensuring that you reach your potential. Understand not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Right. So I really like this because it just very briefly it highlights the important parts. Like so if you want to improve your whatever it is you want to improve your physical strength to be able to have more strength on the squash court, for example, you're going to be doing certain exercises and certain things. So it's not what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. And that really becomes your purpose and then your outcome. It helps your outcome. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so we all know about goal setting. So here's goal setting in the traditional form, which is goal setting involves the development of an action plan designed to motivate and guide a person or group towards a goal. Goal setting can be guided by goal setting criteria or rules, such as the SMART criteria, which is what a lot of people know because that's basically what was introduced to all of us, is the SMART criteria. Goal setting is a major component of personal development and management literature. So this is stuff that we all know. So in the next slide, which we'll go to now, is more of a different way that I would look at it, more through questions. So let's go to the next slide. So here we go. So goal setting process. So for me, goal setting it's a process. It's not just simply just writing things down. You have to put some thought into it. So number one would be, is your end goal realistic and attainable? And it doesn't matter if someone else thinks it's not attainable, it's what you think, because you're the one setting the goal for yourself. So that's why it also has to be realistic. Do you believe you will achieve your goal? And are you motivated every day to work hard in achieving it on time? Right, so these are important things. If you're just creating a goal and you don't actually believe in yourself, let alone the goal, it's going to be very difficult to actually motivate yourself to actually work hard towards that goal and towards finishing that goal in order to progress and move on to another goal. Do you have short and long-term goals? So usually when we set up a goal, our goal might be like to improve our ranking. Let's say for some athletes, they want to improve their ranking. They're at a certain rank, they want to get to a certain number, but in how long? So let's say they give themselves 2 years. Well, then there should also be a shorter version, a shorter goal, maybe to move up one or two spots, as opposed to looking to move up 10 or 20 and just focusing on that. So always having a short and long-term goal makes it a lot easier for number 4, which is, can you measure the progress? Right. So if you have a short-term goal and you're achieving the short-term goals, then that's one way of measuring your progress. The other way, of course, is if it's something that you can measure through testing and through different types of activities like that, then that's a way to measure progress as well. Do you have a support team, which is the most important part of any kind of goal setting, which is not really on your traditional SMART kind of criteria? Do you have a support team, a coach, a trainer, family, friends? The people around you should be supporting you. But do all the people around you actually know what your goal is? So you may have not shared your goal with too many people. Maybe only you know your goal, and maybe your coach knows your goal. Or it could be a different goal, nothing to do with sports, and maybe you know your goal and your family knows your goal. So it's important to have a wider support team and everybody on your side. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so again, from Dr. Greg Wells, from his same book, 1% Tip, which is dream setting. Research shows that if you write down what you want to achieve, you increase your chances of reaching your objective. So again, goal setting, not just verbalizing it, but actually writing it down. If you tell someone else, your chances get even higher. And that's that whole support system, right? So if you tell somebody. So once you've set some dreams and goals, tell people who are close to you. That's the other key component, is we don't just tell anybody. We want to be telling people that really know us, that are close to us, therefore people that will support us, right? So you'll be amazed at how people start to help you reach your dreams once you start putting them out into the world, right? So it's so important to have that support system. Not everybody is fortunate enough to have the full support system of friends, family, trainer, coach, like everybody. So they have to pick and choose the people that are closest to them that they feel will assist and help them along the way. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we get into some positive reinforcement, which is a big aspect of mental strength and mental toughness. Okay, so do you consider yourself to be a positive person? And this is, yes, I'm talking to each one of you that are on this webinar. And it's something that, of course, you would then translate to everybody else that you know. Okay, so a friend, here's an example. So a friend tells you that they are having difficulty with a task. Doesn't matter what the task is. Okay, so do you, number one, tell them to stop trying so hard? It's pointless because you think they cannot do it. So you've seen them try over and over and over and over, and they're still just not able to conquer that task. So you tell them the reality and stop, I don't think you can do it. Or number two, tell them it's okay. I know it's difficult, but you will succeed. I believe in you. Right, so I would like to hear again from the group here, if you want to unmute, which advice would you give to your friend? Number one or number two? And there's no judgments here. Right, this is just a little exercise on where you are right now if you had this situation in front of you. Anybody want to share?
Number two, obviously.
So in the chat, Patrick, number two is so far very popular with a number of people. Okay, well, number two is definitely where I would hope a number of people would be, especially if your coach is in this webinar, because I don't know how successful of a coach we would be if we were number one. So yes, that's great. So now, more importantly, so we just looked at this as an example from an outsider. So as a coach or someone, whether you're helping an athlete or a friend. So if we look at the next slide. Okay, so if you were the person who was having difficulty with that same task, what would you be telling yourself in your mind? Something positive or negative? So any form of self-doubt, self-belief, disbelief, recollection of a past failed attempt is negative. Learning from your mistakes is positive. And we've heard that many times. Learning from your mistakes is key. How we do that? Well, it's through positive reinforcement. So, which would be the key. It's what you tell yourself. So this is just something, nobody has to share anything. It's just more for self-reflection. So it's one thing to, as a coach, to give advice to someone else. But what are you telling yourself if you were in the same situation? That's really what it kind of comes down to, right? So as coaches, we want to be role models. We want to guide. We want to help. We want to
make our athletes kind of comfortable, but are we also doing the same inside for ourselves, right? So behind closed doors, somewhere else, like, do we have positive self-talk about ourselves, or are we, do we have any of the negative side? And it's very natural to have a bit of both. And those of us who, let's say, struggled on the mental toughness side as an athlete or whatever, is usually because we have those self-doubts. We have those self-beliefs. We hold on to past failed attempts and haven't really figured out how to move on from those. So something that's not on the slides would be a three questions you would ask yourself, which would help learn from your mistakes. So if you're playing sports, in the case of squash or tennis, whatever it is, number one would be, what was I trying to do? So if anybody wants to write these down, you can, because it's not on the slide. So what was I trying to do? That's the first question you ask yourself as soon as you make a mistake, which means there has to be a purpose of what you're trying to do, a purpose of your shot. If your answer to your own question is, I don't know what I was trying to do, well, then you can't really beat yourself up for making a mistake, because you're pretty much destined to make a mistake because there's no purpose. So that's number one. Number two, when you recognize what you were trying to do, then number two would be what can I do to fix it? So in other words, once you know what happened, like what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to, let's say, if you're trying to drive the ball down the line, and what actually happened is the ball hit the tin and down at the front. So the ball went out at the tin, but you're trying to drive it down the line. These are totally different types of shots. So that's why it's important to ask yourself, what was I trying to do? Second question is, what happened? So you recognize you're trying to drive it. What happened? Well, you got to figure out what happened with your hand, with your wrist, with the racket face, whatever it is that caused you to hit the tin as opposed to driving it down the line. So your third question would be, what am I going to do next time? So when you recognize your purpose, what it is you're trying to do, what actually happened, then it's a lot easier for you to, in the same situation, to be able to follow through higher and not make the same mistake. So those would be three types of like positive reinforcement kind of questions that help a lot of athletes in situations where you have like sports like tennis and squash. Like obviously, if you're like doing a time slalom, you might not have a second chance, right? So you can still use the same terminology. So if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 goes at the best time, and they take the average of your best time for something like slalom, then yes, you can use the exact same thing, and then help you achieve a better score in your next run. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so topics of mental strength. Okay, so we did a little brainstorm at the beginning, which we had like a bunch of different things, but there's also like different topics of mental strength, and of course this webinar is not long enough to cover all of them. So you have your connection of your mind and body, your mental toughness, which we touched over, your tactical mind. So if you're playing sports, it's like how your mind views the integration of certain shots into match play, and your ability to fool around and create different game plans where your opponent doesn't have to know what you're doing. It's you're focusing on your game plan, and it's game plans that might actually turn into success for you against certain opponents. So you got mental clarity, right? It's that whole inner peace and having a clear mind. right? So your commitment, seeking a coach. Yeah, seeking a coach is actually part of mental strength, right? So every individual is an individual. Some individuals do better with certain coaches, and some individuals do not work well with certain coaches. So seeking a coach is a big part of it, because again, you're trying to build that support system. So visualization will be, again, something else. So I want to ask a question to all of you right now, and of course, feel free to share after my question. Is in terms of visualization, if any of you actually introduce visualization to any of your athletes, what is the main thing you guys focus on? Do you focus on repeating, a good performance, or B, focusing on the worst case scenario stuff, and then visualizing how you would change things? Anybody like to share which one you do? Do you just focus on like good performance where there's no failing, or do you focus on a bit of both, or more on the failing side and trying to visualize a different outcome?
So in the chat, Patrick, we've got a couple of comments. Best case scenario from one person, good performance from another.
Okay. So the reason I ask those kind of questions is because visualization for years has really been done based on good performance, right? To visualize yourself, performing well. But if it's not here, of course, in the slides, but it is out there, and it's something people can always research on, which is doing opposite. You're already training to perform well. So visualization could be a lot more powerful tool if you're using it towards a worst case scenario. So for example, Michael Phelps, who's everybody should know from all his gold medal Olympic wins. What type of visualization do you think Michael Phelps works on with his trainers? Not the good performance, the opposite, the worst case scenario. So what's the worst case scenario for a swimmer? Maybe the goggles come off, right? So something happens where right away then your mind triggers, and then obviously it's natural to slow down and to to picture reality of what just happened. Oh no, Matt, like you don't realize you're in the race anymore because you're focusing on what just happened, which is your goggles coming off right in the middle of a Olympic trial or Olympic race. So the focus for Michael Phelps is more they train on what if this happens? What if this happens during my actual race? How are you going to handle it? How are you going to deal with it? So that's one example. Another example is one of our Canadian track runners. I believe in the Beijing Olympics. So she was whatever event she's in. I forget her name, but she was basically running, and the person behind her came up close enough where basically their shoe basically came in contact with the heel of the Canadian runner, and the Canadian runner's cleat came off. So this is again right in the race. So right in the race, so the cleat came off. So naturally, the athlete just paused. She paused. She was just in shock. Like all this training that they've done, increasing your personal best and all this training leading up to the Olympics, 4 years worth of training just kind of disappeared because of that one moment where something unexpected happened. So they learned from that, and they actually worked on visualizing those kind of worst case scenarios. And sure enough, in the Worlds 2 years later, or the next year, whatever it was, the same thing happened. First to the same athlete. Same thing happened, but this time she was more prepared for how to handle it, and she actually kept running and got the bronze medal. So again, so with the right training, with the right way, then you can actually become mentally tougher when things are bad. So again, our definition, if we were to go back to mental toughness, is being able to push through those tough moments, right? So visualization done, in the non-traditional way, so focusing on those bad moments, could actually help a lot of athletes in ways where just focusing on the good stuff does not help them as much. So that's just some food for thought for you guys. So anybody, of course, it's all about researching, and the more we learn as coaches, the better. Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
Just have a comment as we move to the next slide, Patrick. Goggles example, someone is suggesting they would put in the category of training to cope, not visualization for technique or performance.
Right, and so training to cope. So you're learning how to cope with those kinds of situations, but it can also be done through visualization as well, right? So it's just one of the tools that we have that we can use, right? So there's many different ways of actually training that. That's cool, awesome. So here we have mental strength success. So we have everything begins with you and the belief in yourself and the journey ahead. Okay, so here's a belief system which I put together, which is believe you can improve. Believe you have the technical skills and trust them. So in other words, trust your training. Believe you are better than your opponents. At the end of the day, you are competing. If some kids just stay recreational, that's okay. But if you move on to the competitive stream, then you are competing and you will have opponents. And it's all about knowing that you are the better athlete, regardless of who you're playing in a draw. So it's not about just running to as soon as you get to a tournament, register and go to the draws and see who you're playing. And then as soon as you know who you're playing, you're making a decision whether you're going to win or lose based on the ranking, right? So that's why it's so important to not worry about those things. It's not about focusing on the result. It's about knowing that you're the better athlete. Believe you have respect. So you respect yourself, you respect others, right? Like you're honorable, you have pride, right? So again, it's that whole purpose and the why, right? And believe you can achieve excellence by your standards. So it's important to have your own set of standards and not have to try and perform for someone else's satisfaction. This is a very difficult one, and it's so important, especially if you're a child. And the last one, believe in yourself. And that, from my experience, is one that a lot of athletes struggle with, right? That whole internal believing in themselves, right? So trying to get rid of the whole self-doubt and being self-conscious or allowing certain things to interfere with their focus. So every athlete is going to have their own list of things that affect their performance. So each athlete separately needs to have certain things that they can do in those moments, preparation things to kind of eliminate some of those. So then they stay focused on themselves and the task at hand. Okay, can I go to the next slide? Okay, so when does mental strength begin to develop? So this is where I find it very interesting, because it starts from day one. It does not start from when we become a high performance athlete, which is usually the case, again, from my experience. So a lot of athletes are not really introduced to the mental strength early in life, in terms of from coaches or from parents. So they're introduced more towards it, and later when they become, you know, national athletes, national, international athlete, because then also the higher level coaches that have more coaching education also have more education in the mental strength side at that level. So then they have more tools they can work with the athletes at that level. But for me, as a high performance coach, as well as a grassroots coach, it has to start from the beginning. So therefore, I would prefer to see all coaches go beyond the limited amount of education that they might have on mental strength and go further and learn more of the mental strength side so they can introduce it to their athletes from day one, and understanding, you know, the differences of different ages. So based on my experience and the observation of my own kids, it is very clear that a switch occurs from ages 0 to 2.5 years and 2.5 years to 6. Right, so this switch has been well documented, very well documented for over 50 years, over 60 years, by Maria Montessori. Don't know if anyone knows that name, but she was the founder of Montessori education, Montessori schools. They're international all over. It's a different educational system, right? And it's referred to the unconscious and conscious stage of development. So we go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. Here's my little guy. He was young back then, 5 years old now. So it is an unconscious stage. In this stage, the young mind is not yet developed to understand the effects of failure. So I don't know if any of you have your own children, but it's something you, and if you have your own children, you should be able to observe and understand these things. That when a child is very, very young, there's no such thing as failing. They just keep going. They just keep going. They just keep going. Until they've succeeded. So kids in this stage need no encouragement to succeed, as they will continually make effort to succeed. So in these photos you see, so basically for the first time, trying to lift himself up, like with his strength, using the table to be able to stand up on his feet. So this is before he's able to walk. And you can see the happiness and natural smile on his face when he succeeded. The smile is not from me showing excitement because he succeeded. It's just a natural phenomenon that happens at that age, right? So they just naturally keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and then they achieve it. So next slide. So here's my other guy, same thing. So he's holding basically 2 magnets, pretty strong magnets, and you can see he just basically is trying to pry them apart, and you can see the reaction in him as soon as he pries it apart. That reaction of victory. I did it, right? I did it by myself, right? So it'll be the same thing as the movie with Tom Hanks on the island where he makes fire, and the reaction that he has, that I made fire, right? So that's same kind of reaction. No encouragement was needed, right? So in this unconscious stage, the ability of making full effort comes natural and without thought. However, praise is still wanted and acknowledged for the success. So obviously, if as soon as you see that they're happy for themselves, then obviously, you know, you get a couple claps and stuff, and they get even more excited, and then they continue along that trend. Okay, so which usually comes in the form of parents clapping or showing excitement. Okay, so next slide. So now we go to the conscious stage. So when they're a bit older, so when they're past 3 years old, and every individual is different, right? So the age is not set in stone. So it could be, you know, the conscious stage might start at 4 for some kids, it might start at 2.5. So in this stage, the young mind is developed enough to understand the effects of failure. Winning and losing starts becoming a reality as early as this age. So as early as 3 years old, 3, 4. Right? So kids in this stage need encouragement to stay focused, as they will stop as soon as things become tough. So again, that whole mental toughness that we know later in life to be able to push through the tough moments. Well, when we're a kid who starts realizing that there's winning and losing, and they start developing a conscious where they start becoming either confident or they have a lack of self-confidence. Usually when things are tough and they realize that they're not going to win, or they think they can't win, a lot of times they give up. Right? So this is something huge to know, to understand, not only as parents, but as coaches. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so conscious stage continues. So here we go. So the conscious stage is a critical moment in the development of a child, as it shapes how they handle life hardships later in life. Right? So self-consciousness begins. Poor behavior is common if they feel that they lost at anything. Right? So happiness is viewed from winning, or very young, receiving a gift. Right? So they did something well, they got a gift. Right? So they view that reward as being happy. Same thing as winning. They won at something. Right? So not wanting to do an activity, again, is common. Not because they do not like the activity, but because they feel it's too difficult to win. So that whole element of winning becomes actually, a hindrance and an issue from a very young age. So let's go to the next stage. Okay, so in this next one, so this is our final slide. It's just kind of piecing things together, which is approaches to success without guarantee, of course, because there's no such thing as a guarantee in life, and especially when it comes to mental strength, because every individual is different. So as noted, mental strength development begins at a very young age and before kids begin sports with a coach. So the home environment is where a child's journey begins, and it's parents who need to understand the process, introduce multiple activities, and provide ongoing encouragement to succeed through full effort, not the result. So again, so it's all about building the foundations from the beginning, where it's not about the result. It's not about the winning and losing. It's about making the effort. Okay, so when a child is introduced to making full effort at home, the transition to sport with a coach becomes easier and less taxing on the coach as well as the athlete. Right? So, however, it's the coach who has to create the fun environment to keep a child's interest in the sport and continue to challenge with progression. This becomes the most difficult part. It's coaches that have to be creative and have to introduce things in a fun way, creating a fun environment to hold on to a child's interest, right? Whether some of you are doing group classes or whether you're doing just a private one-on-one. Group classes are challenging. They're very challenging if obviously you're not making it fun, if the group does not want to be there. One-on-one individual with a kid, if you're trying to do stuff and you lose the kid's interest, it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to feel like a very long session. So that's why there's no guarantee, right? So parents have to do their part at home, and in a lot of cases, that might not be the case. Parents might not know how to do anything. They might not have been involved in sport or anything like that themselves as a child or as an adult. So maybe it's not one of the things that they really focused on with their kids. So maybe they just focus more on their kids on education. So then all of a sudden, they're noticing their kids are not active enough. So they put them into sport. But so these kids are coming into sport and they may or may not have the foundation. So then for a coach, they have to start from the beginning. So that's why it's not an easy, aspect. It's not easy to actually develop, because you're trying to develop the mind and body. It's easy to develop the body. It's the mind that's tough. Okay, so then when a child becomes an athlete, and those athletes understand the love of sport, which is the piece that we went over at the beginning, winning becomes natural because they revert back to the unconscious stage where everything just falls together, right? So they're focused, they have their training, they believe in themselves, right? They might have fear, but they know how to overcome their fears, right? And losing becomes an opportunity to learn. The result of that is a champion. As we know, everyone can be a champion for themselves, but when it comes to a gold medal champion, there can't be that many, right? So, because obviously in a tournament, only one person wins the tournament. So that's why it's not easy. This isn't an area to really have hundreds and thousands of people be mentally strong. That's not something that's easy to do by any means. So everyone's goal should be to start with one or two, right? One or two people, and then try and see if you can make it a domino effect and get everybody to help each other. Okay, so here's where we can open up to questions.
Great, thank you, Patrick. As Patrick said, we now welcome any questions of Patrick. You can unmute your microphone or type in the chat. Any questions at all?
And again, if people don't, if any of you don't want to ask or share anything right now, maybe so you can go back to my contact information. I'm sure Jeffrey, I guess, will share the information with everybody. And then you can always email me, or you can always contact me the different way if you want to ask some questions at a later date. So I'm fully open to helping anybody and answering questions.
So we've just got one question here, Patrick, from Kielid. Are there any personality tests we can give students to determine their current level of mental strength?
There are multiple types of tests you can do, but the easiest thing is just to basically use questionnaires, right? So it's to write down some questions and give it to all your students as like a homework thing, and it could be done at the very beginning. Whether it's traditionally at the beginning of when you start working with them, whether it's individual or a group, and you can hand them a certain questionnaire asking certain questions just so you get some background information, hoping that they're also going to be honest. And a lot of the times they may or may not be honest, because it depends on their confidence and their trust in you. So it's always good to have a questionnaire at the beginning and then have a questionnaire later when you start building that trust.
Okay, then we have a comment and then another question. A comment from David: the development of the child's creativity is more important than using the coach's creativity. Any comment, Patrick?
Well, yes. Well, at the end of the day, it's the individual that's performing. It's the individual that's going to make the difference. So a coach should be a guide, not a dictator, right? So the coach shouldn't only have one way, right? So as different kids learn different ways. Every individual learns that different ways. Some learn by watching, some learn by doing. So there's the different types of learners. So if a child is creative, as long as that creativity is not doing physical harm, then that creativity is something you want them to continue, right? As opposed to, you know, trying to put an end to it because they're not doing something your way. So as long as it's not causing physical harm or it's not going to cause a negative effect down the road, and that's where it becomes judgmental by a coach, right? So it's all trial and error.
Okay, next question comes from Jeff Hipner up in the territories. He asks, what are some ways to engage a child that has not been involved in sport before?
Yeah, that's the whole fun aspect. But now, so they may have not. So this is up north in Canada, right? So they may have not been involved in sport, but they might have been involved in life activities outside, right? Outside the home, in the environment. So if you know what they've been involved in, what skill sets they might have been introduced to, like just like natural skill sets that people just naturally develop up north, you can then use those towards, you know, building skills towards sport, because when it comes to someone who's never done anything, it's we're not expecting them to just be able to pick a racket and right away, you know, be able to do awesome performance hitting the ball against the wall. So you might have to do stuff that has nothing to do with the racket. Just use the ball in hand. Right, so it's just literally just going back to the basics and doing the fundamental stuff where let's say in my case that I'm doing with my kids, but it's different. I've been coaching, I've been an athlete, so I can do the throwing, catching, jumping, the different basic active for life type of movements with the kids. So that would be the way I would approach things. You know, if I had someone who's never been exposed to sport, it's getting them to learn the motor skills, and they might already have it from other activities that have nothing to do with sport, but it actually relates to sport. So that's how I would approach that type of situation.
Okay, then we have a comment and then a question. So Kiel just thanked you for your feedback on the previous question, the approach to building mental strength and your emphasis on belief in yourself. He says it's very critical. And then the next question comes from Simon Hall. Any comment on balance between external pressure to win from parents versus internal desire to win?
Yeah, well, that becomes the tough situation and tough the debate that may go on for a long time, right? So I've obviously over the years I've seen many parents, you know, push their children, you know, like they're living through their kids' performance. And from my experience, none of those kids had the internal desire to win because they're pretty much mentally broken because they had a fear of losing because of their parents. So it's a very difficult situation. But all those kids perform better if their parents are not around. So if their parents are not at the competitions, if their parents are not there during their training sessions, they perform better because there's a huge weight taken off their shoulders. But it's not easy to mandate, you know, for parents not to be there. Parents want to be there because they're the ones paying the money. They're the ones that don't want to see the results. And it's those parents that don't really understand that it's the kid that's doing the performing, and it's the kid that has to have the desire to win or to even stay in the sport, because there's so many kids that quit right at the age of 15, 16, 17. So there are a lot of people that quit, unfortunately, because of the way they're raised. Andre Agassi, prime example of a world champion. His entire life, obviously, when he was young, he was pushed. Yes, he became a champion, but tennis is not one of the things that he ever wanted to think about later, like in his current life now, not as a tennis player. And his wife, Steffi Graf, the same thing. Right, so it really comes down to you know, is the child's goal for themselves, not for their parents, but for themselves, and what are the parents' goals. And sometimes it's just that tough situation that you will find in major team sports and at very high level or national level. So sometimes the coaches have to have that conversation with the parents, right? It's not easy, and the coach may end up looking like the bad guy because he went against the parents' wishes. But sometimes a coach has to look out for their athletes and the best interest for the athletes. So it's a very tough ethical situation and not an easy one.
Great, thank you, Patrick. I think at this stage we're at the 1 o'clock hour, and so if you have any additional questions, I would encourage you to email Patrick, and as he said, he's happy to reach out and help you. So with that said, Patrick, thank you so much for your presentation on mental strength, your guide to success in sports and life. Yeah, I found it very informative, and no, I will certainly use some of the things you talked about in my coaching. For those of you still on the call, if you haven't registered yet, I would encourage you to register for our next Squash Canada Coach PD webinar. It's called Emotional Intelligence and its Implication to Sports Coaching. The presenter is Esme Gillick, and she will talk to you about emotional intelligence, the importance of developing emotional intelligence as a coach, and the tools and strategies to implement emotional intelligence in the coaching role. She is a writer on this topic and has a ton of experience as an athlete, coach, and teacher. So I encourage you to register for that on Wednesday, December 2nd. And then the rest of our webinars will take place in the new year in 2021 with topics including how to market yourself on social media, urban squash programming, coaching beyond the game, and we will have more topics as we go forward. So again, please register for our upcoming webinars, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.